Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my garage. Episode 3 of the Powerstroke build series. And in this episode, we're going to work on getting the front accessories and the timing cover taken off of this. So part of doing that, not only do we got to do the obvious and take everything off the front of the engine, we're also going to have to get the oil pan off, because we got to get the oil pump pickup tube off that goes to the crank driven oil pump. So probably going to be making a big mess and having some fun getting it done. So stay tuned. So here's where we're going to start on this. We're going to start by removing these idler pulleys, the tensioner, and then we're going to get this bracket off. Now if you notice on this tensioner, it looks like a pretty standard Torx socket, and it's not. This right here is a T50 Torx. If you notice, you have real sharp points to make the star. This right here is an FT50 Torx. So a little bit different design. It has a little bit more of a flat spot. They're almost a little bit more rounded. Now, both of these will work, but the FTX 50 is actually the correct size. It has a little bit better bite than the regular T50 Torx. You can actually see I have play with this socket in there. With the FTX, it's a whole bunch tighter. So it's going to give us a better bite. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is take this pulley off of the tensioner. Now, the thing to keep in mind with these is this is a reverse thread. So it's going to be right to loosen it and left to tighten it. So we're going to turn this one here clockwise to pop it off. So now that we got the bracketry off of this side here, we're going to move over to the other side and we're going to get this bracket off. Now the challenge to doing this one is we're going to pull this vacuum pump off, and as you can see, we have bolts that are here behind this pulley. So the way we have to go about getting this pulley off is with a very standard power steering pump pulley puller. They're available from several different places. I actually have this kit here that I've owned for many years. I've got it from Harbor Freight. Not really a huge fan of Harbor Freight. I was in a pinch. It was on a Sunday. They had it. I kind of bought it expecting it to only work one time. And I've actually used this kit quite a lot. So pretty simple, easy kit. I'll show you how to do that if you've never used one. So there's a couple of parts you're going to need to make this work. The first is these two clamshell pieces. So if you notice on this, one side is different than the other. You have one side here with a little bit deeper groove, the other one here that's a little bit more shallow. So the side with the deeper groove is going to bite onto the pulley. So it's going to go this way. But before we can put that on, we need our anvil. So we have our little button to push it, this puller piece that threads into the actual anvil itself. So we're going to slip these over here like that. Then we're going to work and get this lined up here to where it all fits on here together. Now sometimes the button doesn't work and you're going to have to pull it off, which looks like that might be my case on this situation. I can't get it to clamp over. So we're just going to pop the button out. Now the other thing to keep in mind, I have a little bit of anti-seize and a little bit of engine oil in here. It's very important to lubricate those threads. If not, you're going to run into a problem where it's going to bind up and you're going to break it. So now what holds all this together is this collar. We're actually just going to slide this collar right over it. Then we can go through and tighten all this stuff down. Okay, so now this collar is loose on here still, but I can actually pull this off, and you can see these pieces are actually under tension now, so they're not going to fall. We're going to leave the collar on just so nothing slips out. So what I'm going to do now is hold this nut and turn the anvil in, and that's going to basically drive this in on the shaft and it's going to pull this pulley out. So now to make this work, I got a 13/16 wrench holding the nut, and it's a 1/2 inch wrench or socket on the anvil. And again, we're just going to hold one and push with the other and slowly just work this off. And it's going to be a little bit stiff coming off because it's been on there for a long time. It is a press fit, and you always get a little bit of rust that develops on the end of there. So if it ends up fighting you and being too tight, take a little bit of penetrating oil, spray the end of the shaft, and just kind of let it soak in. So now you can get a pretty good look of why I don't want to do the regulated return fuel system once this engine is back in the truck. I'd have to pull both of those drive brackets off, mainly to get to this fitting that's buried right here, and to get to this fitting that's buried right here. So both of those are going to have to come out of the head when we go to do that. So much easier to do it now. Also, you can see where we got this all apart. We have our supply and return fuel lines. And as part of the regulated return system, these are actually going to have to come out. So I'd have to have all this out anyway to mock up new fuel lines and route everything through here. So again, kind of the main reason why I want to do that now. The other thing that I'm a little concerned about is this water pump has been replaced. The thing that concerns me is there should be a molded O-ring in that timing cover. And as I'm looking at this, I can see down in here that somebody's put some silicone. You can see we got some hanging off of this pipe right here. It's oozing out back here. So I'm really kind of worried that down the road that's going to be giving me some troubles. So I'd rather just deal with it now while I have it out of the truck and easy to get to. From here, we're going to go ahead and remove our electronic components. We have our exhaust back pressure sensor, we have the temperature sensor, the cam position sensor, and our coolant temperature sensor. So we're going to get all those unplugged and out of the way. And then I'm going to work on getting this sensing tube off of the manifold and out of our way altogether. These are very common to plug up, or they'll actually rust through and you'll have holes in it. This one isn't rusted. I already tested it electronically to make sure that I had pressure reading through here. This is a new sensor because it originally had failed, but I do want to go through and clean this out. So we're going to get that off and out of the way and just give us some more room. So here's something to keep in mind when you go to do this. When you go to take out your exhaust back pressure sensor, you always want to hold this nut. This is actually part of this bracket that holds that assembly in place. So if you're ever replacing the sensor or undoing this nut, hold this and then twist whichever one you're trying to take out. So that way you don't twist this up, damage it. Now that we have this whole harness undone from the front, I'm actually just going to pull this wire harness completely out of the way. That way I'm not dealing with all this stuff kind of being right where I'm trying to work. now with our wire harness out of the way, I'm going to go and remove this tube right here. This is the one that I was trying to explain to you earlier in the earlier video. This is the one that goes to the fuel bowl and is the fuel drain from the fuel bowl. So being that we're going to be going to a regulated return system, this is now obsolete. We'll never use this again. From here, I want to go and get my exhaust back pressure sensor out of the way, and it's going to open up the bolt that we're going to need to get to the high pressure oil, the high pressure oil pump. I'm also going to take off our cam position sensor because with as fragile as these are, I really don't want it getting damaged. And again, I'm seeing silicone back here. Shouldn't be glued down. So this right here is another part that should be sealed down with just this O-ring. But for some reason, somebody went and glued this in with silicone. So again, we're going to have to clean this out and reseal it correctly. Just as I suspected here, there is a molded O-ring with a bunch of silicone holding this together. You can see here on the bolts, look at all this uncured, gooey, sticky, nasty, undried silicone. So we'll get this cleaned up, we'll make it usable. I'll get the timing cover cleaned up. It's still gonna work, but this is gonna fail, it's gonna leak, so I'd much rather do it now. I have the engine lined up here on top dead center. There's actually this mark in the harmonic dampener that I lined up with the tang that holds the cam sensor in place before I took all this stuff here apart. Now, the other thing I know is because both my intake and exhaust rockers on my #1 cylinder are loose. So we're gonna go ahead and get this pulled off. Now that we got the crank damper out of the way, It gives me access to get the bolts out of the oil pump. When you go to take this oil pump off, it actually has a hole in the oil pump housing that's located to this dowel. So you got to spend a little bit of time, work it off, and then you want to make sure that this oil pump comes out as one piece. There's a gear back here that'll kind of hang up on the crank a little bit. You just all want it to come out together, just like that. Now before I roll this engine over and take the oil pan off, our next step is to get the oil cooler out. So there's 2 bolts here on the front, and then on the back we have 3 bolts that hold it, and this whole assembly is going to come out in one piece. High pressure oil pump and the reservoir out, so that way we can get the rest of this timing cover off. One of the things I did when I pulled this engine out off video, I actually knocked this plug loose and I sucked all the oil out of here. I ended up getting about 1.5 quarts of oil out of here. So it's something you're going to want to do before you go pulling this reservoir off. If not, you're going to be having oil going everywhere. The next step that I'm going to do is take the 2 high pressure oil lines off. I'd rather take them off from here than off of the pump, just because I don't want to disturb the fittings here. I've run into some issues where the fittings that are threaded into the high pressure oil pump, if you take those loose, they can actually blow out of the pump. I've had it happen. It's not a good thing. It usually ends up destroying the high pressure oil pump. So I'm going to leave them attached on this end, just take them off from the heads. So it's just an 11/16 wrench and breaking the 2 fittings loose. And then just taking the 2 clamps off of here from these brackets, our lines are now free. So now I'm going to get this bolt here out. We're going to slide this gear off. And then it's really just two 10mm bolts. And then we can get that oil pump out. Now I'm just using an 18mm socket on my 3/8 impact. Should be enough to get this loose. So the thing to keep in mind here, you got this big thick washer that goes on there. This gear is not splined onto this pump. It's not keyed on. There's nothing that orients it to the pump. And it's not timed. So there's no need to mark anything or try and line anything back up. We just got to kind of wiggle this off and sometimes get back there with a little pry bar and give this a push to get it off of the pump. Now we can lift this gear out. To get a better idea of where the bolts are that hold this high pressure oil pump in, looking at it from the back where the turbo sits, looking toward the front of the engine, you can see this is our IPR, or our injection pressure regulator. There's one 10mm bolt down here. There's one 10mm head bolt right here. So we're going to take those two off, and then this pump is just going to slide right out. Now that we've got that all unbolted, we're just going to be able to slide this straight back. And the last thing I'm going to do before I work on getting the oil pan off is I want to get these hard lines out of here. They're going to be in the way once I go to try and get this off, so it's just going to be a whole bunch easier to get that now. So much junk caked on here I can barely even see the hardware. The way that I'm choosing to remove the oil pan is going to be a little bit less ideal than the way I'd like to do it. Normally I would just roll the engine over, being that it's on an engine stand, zip the bolts off, it'll be real simple and easy. The problem is this engine's been sitting on this stand for a couple days now. Actually a couple weeks. Yeah, weeks already. So everything that I've done with the fuel injectors and everything, it's all just drained down into the pan. So if I flip this upside down, then I'm going to take all that junk that's in the pan and I'm going to dump it back into the engine. And I really don't want to keep having contaminated oil going back and forth through the engine. So I'm going to take the pan off as it sits. And then once I get the pan off, then I can roll the engine over and get the oil pump pickup tube off and then get the timing cover out. So yeah. This will be fun. So now that we got the pan on the floor, you can kind of see down in here the reason why I didn't want to roll this over. There's a whole bunch of oil and junk and everything else that was down in here that I just didn't want to roll the engine over and have it drain back through the engine. And the reason I didn't pull the drain plug is mainly because I didn't think there was that much stuff in there. And it's kind of hard with as deep as this pan is to get a drain pan underneath of it while it's on the engine stand. So now that I got this off, I'll get it drained out and then we'll get it cleaned up. And then we'll get the engine rolled over, we'll get the oil pump pickup tube off. So now that we have the engine inverted, I took a couple minutes just to kind of wipe everything down. It was just full of oil dripping kind of everywhere. But now you can see we have this oil pump pickup tube, and this is the whole reason why I had to take the oil pan off. It comes right down here to the front of the timing cover where it's held in with these two 10mm head bolts. Those feed directly into the oil pump through the front timing cover. So if this is something where you ever think that you're just going to replace the timing cover in the truck, you're going to have a challenge. It can be done, but you have to get the oil pan off to make that happen. So I'm going to go ahead, take these two bolts out here for the oil pump pickup tube, and then we have this bracket. I can just take this one 10mm here off, and then the oil pump pickup tube can come out, and then we can go ahead and take our timing cover off. So in kind of the same fashion that we took the oil pan off, I'm going to get the timing cover off the same way. This is a combination of silicone holding it down and O-ring. So we're just going to gently kind of pry it off here. Well guys, since I've got this torn down about as far as I need to go, I'm going to call it quits for this episode and start episode 4 after I get this thing cleaned up and ready to go back together. So it's going to take me a little bit of time. I'm not going to bore you guys with the cleaning aspect of it because really, who wants to see that? And I made quite the mess on my floor here, so we're going to have to clean this up too. So I'd like to say thanks for taking the time to watch my videos. Hope you like them. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, and I'll catch you on episode number 4 when we start building this thing back together. Thanks for watching.